the background blur effect. So we are going to start by creating a copy of the background. We'll call this blurred background. I'm going to move it to the third layer here. And we are going to load the selection. So in order to load the selection onto this layer, you need to hold down the Command key and click on the layer mask. That loads the selection, but again, the blurred background layer remains selected. So what I need to do is I need to remove her from the background, because if I just blur the background straight, bits of her shirt are going to come into that blurred background, and I don't want that. So I'm going to show you how to remove an object from the background. We're going to start by expanding our selection by going to Select, Modify, Expand. And we're going to expand by about 15 pixels here. That seems to be enough. With that selected, we're going to go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And you can see the preview of what it's hoping to do there. And normally I'd be a little bit more concerned about some of the errors in how it's filling, but it's actually doing a pretty good job. And since I'm going to blur it, a lot of that will be hidden anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. So I'm going to deselect. I'm going to select deselect. And you'll notice it placed that on a separate layer. So I need to combine these two again. I'm going to click on the blurred background, hold down the Shift key, select blurred background copy, and I'm going to go to the layer menu here, and I'm going to merge these layers. So if you want to memorize that, that's Command E, and you'll notice that becomes a single layer. So if I turn that layer off, I can see that layer. Turn that layer on, there she is. Okay, so I'm going to turn this layer off for the time being so I can see how I'm blurring this layer. And we're going to do a special kind of blur called Tilt Shift. So you're coming to Filter, Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift. And the Tilt Shift blur creates blur above and below a centralized focus point. So I'm going to drag this down to where I want her feet to be. And so I can kind of remember her feet are down around here. And then I can adjust how blurry and how fast the blur happens by dragging these down and closer. So you can see how fast or slow that gets blurry. I'm going to narrow the depth of field quite a bit by dragging this pretty close to the center, moving these up. And remember, depth of field drops off faster closer to the camera, so I want that to get pretty blurry pretty fast. And then I can choose how blurry I want it by cranking up the blur factor here. And again, adjusting these. Just a smidge. All right. So I like where that is. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And it has applied that blur to that layer. In order to see how that looks, I need to apply a mask to this layer. So again, I'm going to load the selection by command clicking on the layer mask. This layer, the brightness contrast layer, is still selected, which I should really rename that, but for now we're just going to click on layer mask here. And now she is isolated from that layer, and we can see the layer below her. is nice and blurry. So um, that looks good.